All right, diving right in today, and I know this is something a lot of you are really interested in, HIV vaccine research.
That's a big one.
It is, and we've got some great material to work with, excerpts from this article. The Fight Against HIV Vaccine Research.
Lots to unpack there.
Definitely. So I guess our mission today is, really try to get to the heart of where this research stands now. What are the biggest hurdles? But also, what are those glimmers of hope? What's got scientists excited?
Yeah, and I think it's important to, even though a lot of people listening probably know the basics, like why it's so hard to develop an HIV vaccine, the article goes deeper.
Yeah, it does. Like, we all hear about HIV's mutation rate. It's high, we get that. But what makes that such a nightmare specifically when you're trying to create a vaccine?
Well, think about it this way. It's not just that the virus changes rapidly, it's that those mutations often occur in the very parts of the virus that a vaccine would target.
Oh, I see.
It's like you're designing a key to fit a specific lock, but the lock keeps changing shape every time you try to use it.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So frustrating. And then on top of that, it's not like we're dealing with just one type of HIV, right? There's this whole strain diversity thing.
Exactly. Some viruses, you can think of them as a single target. You hit that target, you're done. But HIV is more like a swarm.
A swarm, oh gosh.
Yeah, so a vaccine needs to be effective against a whole range of strains, or else it's kind of like you're only plugging a few holes in a leaky boat, You're not really solving the problem.
Got it. So broad attack, not a targeted one. But then even with that, there's this whole other thing, this immune evasion the article talks about, and that just sounds, I don't know, sneaky.
Right, it's like, how can a virus evade our immune system? Well, the thing is, HIV can actually integrate itself into our DNA, so it becomes part of our cells.
Seriously.
Yeah, and that makes it incredibly difficult for our immune system to even recognize the infected cells, let alone attack them effectively.
It's like it's wearing a disguise made out of our own body.
Wow. Okay, so we've laid out the bad news, but there is good news, right? What about these mRNA vaccines everyone's talking about? Feels like we're building on the success of the COVID vaccines.
For sure. There are definitely some parallels there. Moderna, for instance, they have this HIV vaccine candidate called mRNA-1644 that's showing some real promise.
So, remind me, how do those mRNA vaccines even work? It's not like injecting a weakened virus, right?
Wait, instead, it's like delivering instructions, like a blueprint, directly to our cells. These instructions tell our cells to make proteins that kind of mimic parts of the HIV virus.
So it's like showing our immune system a picture of the enemy.
Exactly. This is the bad guy. Learn to recognize him. And that triggers an immune response, trains our bodies to fight the real virus if it ever shows up.
A dress rehearsal for the immune system. Clever. But hold on, with HIV mutating so fast, how do we make sure that picture of the enemy stays accurate? That's one of the big challenges researchers are working on. But early trials of mRNA-1644, they've been focusing on trying to stimulate these special immune cells, broadly neutralizing antibodies, bNAbs for short.
Right, bNAbs, they get mentioned a lot, but honestly, I get a little lost in the science there. Why are they so important for fighting HIV specifically?
Okay, imagine this. Most antibodies are like keys that only fit one specific lock. bNAbs, they're more like master keys.
Oh, interesting.
They can target parts of the HIV virus that don't mutate as easily, so they have the potential to be effective against a much wider range of strains.
So even if the virus tries to change its disguise, these bNAbs can still see through it.
Exactly. And there's a ton of research going on around bNAbs. Like the AMP study was huge. It was one of the biggest trials looking at bNAbs for HIV prevention.
And did it work?
It wasn't a vaccine trial itself, but it gave us a ton of information about how bNAbs work and how we might be able to, encourage our bodies to produce more of them with a vaccine.
Okay, so that's one promising avenue. But the article also mentioned this other approach, mosaic vaccines. What's the idea behind those?
Well, mosaic vaccines, they're designed to tackle this whole HIV diversity problem head on. Imagine you're creating a vaccine that's like a patchwork quilt, made up of pieces from different HIV strains.
So instead of one picture of the enemy, you're showing the immune system a whole lineup.
Exactly. You're exposing it to a much wider range of viral elements. So the idea is this could stimulate a much broader, more powerful immune response that could be effective against multiple strains.
I like that analogy. And are there any actual mosaic vaccines in development right now?
There are. Janssen, the pharmaceutical company, they have one in clinical trials right now in Africa and the Americas. It's showing some early promise, but it's, still early days.
So lots of potential paths forward, but obviously we've got to be realistic about the challenges too. We've talked about the mutation, the strain diversity, but the article also brings up this idea of viral latency, and I'll be honest, that one's a bit of a head scratcher for me.
Yeah, so remember how we talked about HIV hiding out in our DNA? Sometimes the virus could go quiet, like it's dormant inside those cells, and this is what creates what's called a latent reservoir.
So it's like, even if we could stop new infections, there's still this hidden stash of the virus just waiting to reactivate.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
And that latent reservoir is a huge barrier to finding a cure, because even if you stop new infections, the virus could still be lurking in the body, ready to stage a comeback.
Wow, so it's like we're fighting a war on two fronts. But you know what? Even with all this complexity, it's amazing to see how fast HIV research is progressing.
Absolutely. And that's actually what we'll dig into more after a short break. We'll explore what the future might hold for this field and what these breakthroughs could mean for, the fight against HIV globally.
One thing that really struck me in the article was just how much collaboration is happening in this field. It's not just one lab, one country. It's a global effort.
It really is. I mean, HIV is a global challenge, so it makes sense that the research reflects that.
Totally. And I think it's easy to forget sometimes, science can seem like this very isolated thing, but this is a great example of people coming together to try and solve a problem that affects, all of humanity.
Absolutely. And it's not just about sharing knowledge and resources. It's also about understanding the social and economic factors that play a role in the epidemic. Poverty, stigma, discrimination. These things create barriers to prevention, testing, treatment.
Right. So even if we had the perfect vaccine, those issues could still get in the way of actually getting it to the people who need it most.
Exactly. It's like it's not enough to just have the scientific breakthrough. You have to address the social context as well.
It's a good point, and it kind of leads into something else the article highlighted. This idea of knowing your status, it seems so basic, but it's still a huge factor.
Huge. Knowing your status is empowering. It lets people make informed decisions about their health, access treatment if they need it, take steps to prevent transmission.
And luckily, testing is a lot easier and more affordable than it used to be, right? I mean, the article even mentioned HIVRNatetest.com as a resource for confidential, affordable testing.
Yeah, that's a great resource, and there are others out there too, but you're right. Even with testing more available, there's still a lot of stigma around HIV that makes people afraid to get tested or to disclose their status.
That's true. It's like this fear and shame that just keeps the cycle going, makes it harder to get a handle on the epidemic.
Exactly. Stigma is one of the biggest obstacles we face. It prevents people from seeking help, it fuels discrimination, and it ultimately just slows down progress.
So we've got these social hurdles, but we can't forget about the scientific ones either. And we've talked about latency, this hidden reservoir of dormant virus. It just seems like such a tricky thing to tackle, even if we did have a preventative vaccine. Is there anything being done to target that latent reservoir specifically?
Oh, there is. There's some really exciting research going on in that area. Scientists are looking at things like gene editing techniques and think CRISPR, to potentially snip out the hidden viral DNA.
Whoa, that's wild. So we're talking about potentially eliminating the virus completely, not just managing it.
It's a bold goal, but it's not as far-fetched as it might have seemed a few years ago. Gene editing is really opening up new possibilities.
It's amazing to think about, but like any new technology, especially one that involves messing with our genes, there have to be some pretty serious ethical considerations, right?
Absolutely. Safety has to be the top priority. And then there's the whole issue of access, making sure that if these treatments become available, they're available to everyone who needs them, not just a select few.
It's a lot to think about, and it makes you realize that even as we push the boundaries of science, we have to be really careful and responsible about how we do it.
For sure. But in the meantime, we can't afford to just sit around and wait for these new technologies to mature. We still have the tools to make a big difference in the fight against HIV right now.
Right. Prevention testing, early treatment, all of those things are still vital.
Absolutely. And it comes back to personal responsibility too. Knowing your status, practicing safe sex if you're HIV positive, getting on treatment and staying on it.
The article really emphasized that, the idea that each of us can contribute to the solution.
It's a collective effort, no doubt. And every action, whether it's getting tested, talking about HIV openly, supporting organizations working in this field, it all adds up.
Well said. And, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm struck by the fact that we've talked a lot about the science and the technology, but really, this is a story about people.
100%. It's about the individuals living with HIV, The researchers working tirelessly to find a cure, the healthcare workers on the front lines, the activists fighting for justice and equality, their stories are what drive this fight forward.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that amidst all the complexity, all the challenges, there's also a lot of hope.
Definitely. We've come such a long way from the early days of the epidemic. And while there's still a long road ahead, the progress we've made, the knowledge we've gained, it all points towards a future where HIV is no longer the threat it once was. And that's a future worth fighting for.
It's amazing to think back, how much our understanding of HIV has changed. Like, it wasn't that long ago that an HIV diagnosis was, well, it was a death sentence.
Yeah, a very different world.
It was. And now, thanks to antiretroviral therapy, people with HIV can live long, healthy lives. It's incredible what science can do.
It really is, and it speaks to, the dedication of so many people, the researchers, the clinicians, the advocates, who just refuse to give up.
Right, and even with those advancements in treatment, finding a vaccine is still the ultimate goal, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, treatment is great, but a vaccine would be, well, it would be a game changer.
No doubt. And it seems like that search for a vaccine is getting, I don't know, more sophisticated. Like we've talked about viral latency, the virus hiding out in our cells. Are there any research approaches that are specifically trying to target that latent reservoir?
Oh, there are. There's some really cutting-edge things being explored, like scientists are looking at gene editing techniques, using things like CRISPR to actually snip out the hidden viral DNA.
Wait, so we're talking about, like, potentially eliminating HIV from the body completely?
That's the idea. It's still early days, but the potential is huge.
It's mind-blowing. But I imagine there are some, ethical concerns with something like gene editing, right? Especially when you're talking about something as sensitive as HIV.
Oh, for sure. Anytime you're talking about manipulating our genes, you have to tread carefully. Safety is paramount. And then there's the question of access, making sure that if these treatments do become a reality, they're available to everyone who needs them, not just a privileged few.
Right. It can't just be for the wealthy or the well-connected. It has to be for everyone.
Exactly. That's a crucial part of the conversation. But even while we're exploring these really complex, futuristic approaches, we can't forget about what we can do right now to fight HIV.
Absolutely. Prevention, testing, early treatment, those are all still so important.
Couldn't agree more. Those are the tools we have in hand, and we have to use them.
The article was really clear about that, emphasizing personal responsibility, knowing your status, practicing safe sex, seeking treatment if you need it. It's a powerful message.
It is, and it's a reminder that we're not powerless in this fight. We can all make choices that protect ourselves and others.
So true. As we wrap up our deep dive here, I have to say I'm feeling, cautiously optimistic. Is that the right phrase?
I think so, yeah. I mean, there are still huge challenges, but the progress we've made, the breakthroughs we've seen, it's really remarkable.
It is. It shows what we can achieve when we put our minds to it, when we collaborate, when we refuse to give up hope.
And it's important to hold on to that hope, amidst all the complexity, all the heartache. There's a real sense of momentum in the fight against HIV, and I think that's something to celebrate.
Absolutely. And I think it leaves us with a question for our listeners, something to ponder. If an effective HIV vaccine were available tomorrow, how do you think it would change the world? What would it mean for individuals, for communities, for our collective future? It's a big question, but it's one worth asking ourselves as we continue to learn, to act, and to hope for a world without HIV.
We're going to unpack two big areas. First, the incredible leaps and bounds happening in HIV vaccine research.
Right, like finally some real progress.
And second, we'll explore how early detection methods are getting, well, crazy advanced.
Oh, it's so crucial.
Exactly. So first up, the quest for an HIV vaccine.
Yeah, everybody's heard about vaccines these days.
Especially after, well, everything with COVID.
Definitely, but HIV, a whole other ballgame.
Why is that? What makes this virus so tough for scientists to crack, I guess?
Well, HIV it's sneaky, It's like it's constantly changing, dodging our immune system.
So it's not like, just targeting one version of the virus and you're done.
Nope, not that easy. HIV mutates so fast, it's hard for our bodies to build up a proper defense.
I see. So how are scientists dealing with that?
A few ways, actually. One that's super interesting is using, remember mRNA technology?
Oh, right. Like the COVID vaccine.
Exactly. Moderna's mRNA-1644 vaccine, that's one.
Yeah, I remember reading something about that. What makes that promising, like specifically for HIV?
Well, with mRNA, you're basically sending instructions to your cells, teaching them to make a little piece of the virus protein. And that triggers your immune system to create antibodies, so it's ready to fight the real deal.
Like a sneak peek, huh?
Yeah.
Showing the immune system what to look out for.
Right. And the early results with this mRNA HIV vaccine, they suggest it might stimulate some really important immune cells.
Important how?
These cells they're rare, but they're powerful, like the key to really controlling HIV.
Wow, that's amazing. So mRNA is one approach. What else?
Another strategy is all about, well, we call them broadly neutralizing antibodies, or bNAbs for short.
bNAbs.
Think of them like super detectives.
Yeah.
They can spot a criminal, even in disguise. They can target multiple HIV strains, no matter how much the virus mutates.
So instead of just one version, it's like training our immune system to recognize a whole bunch of them.
Exactly. And there are a bunch of studies going on. The AMK study, for example, is looking at how effective they are at preventing infection.
So delivering these antibodies directly to people
Yeah.
and seeing if that protects them.
Yeah, and the early data. It's looking good.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, so we got the mRNA approach. We got these super detective bNAbs.
Right.
What's the third one?
Third approach is what we call a Mosaic vaccine. Janssen's the company working on this one.
Yeah, okay.
They've designed it kind of like, a universal flu shot, but for HIV,
Okay.
it uses pieces from different HIV strains, to give a broader protection against all that diversity.
Smart. Like covering all the bases.
Yeah, and there have been some trials in Africa and the Americas showing some promise.
So are we close?
Not quite at the finish line yet. Getting that really high efficacy with the Mosaic vaccine has been tricky.
I see. And we don't know how long the protection might last either, huh?
Right.
Okay, so while we wait for that vaccine breakthrough, early detection is crucial, right?
Absolutely. We can't afford to wait. Early diagnosis. It's a cornerstone of HIV prevention and treatment.
Makes sense.
The sooner someone knows, the sooner they can protect themselves and others.
Right, it's not just about individual health, it's about public health, stopping the spread.
Exactly. And with early diagnosis, people can start treatment right away, and that's key.
How so?
Well, early treatment, it helps prevent complications, keeps the virus suppressed, helps people with HIV live long and healthy lives.
That's incredible. And we've seen some big advancements in early detection too, right? Definitely. Some really major breakthroughs.
Like what?
One of the biggest has got to be, HIV RNA tests. They can detect the virus much earlier than the traditional antibody tests.
How much earlier?
We're talking within 7 to 10 days of exposure. That's huge.
Wow, that's a game changer. But why are RNA tests better than the traditional ones?
Two things. They're faster and they're more accurate, especially in those early stages. I see. So the traditional tests, they're looking for antibodies, which take time for our body to make.
Exactly. With RNA tests, we're looking for the virus's genetic material directly.
Makes sense. And what about those point-of-care tests I keep hearing about them?
Oh, they're fantastic. Think about it. Getting your results in 20 minutes right there in the doctor's office.
That's amazing. No more waiting for days, all anxious to get those lab results.
Right. We have finger prick tests, saliva tests, so many convenient and reliable options these days.
Wow, that's great. And are there, any super innovative technologies coming up?
That's a good question, and it brings up another important one. How do we reach those most vulnerable to HIV?
Yeah, especially those in remote areas or places where access to healthcare is tough.
Exactly. That's where AI-driven tools and at-home testing kits come in.
So these new technologies can really bridge that gap in access.
Absolutely. Imagine a world where anyone, anywhere can get tested quickly, easily, and privately.
Wow, that would be incredible.
It's becoming a reality.
So for everyone listening, getting tested regularly, knowing your status, it's crucial.
Couldn't agree more.
And if you're looking for info on where to get tested, what type of test is best for you, HIVRNtestguide.com is a great resource.
Definitely check it out.
It really feels like after all this, we're at a turning point in how we approach HIV.
Yeah, wouldn't you say? Things are really looking up.
It's like we're closing in on it from both sides, preventing new infections with vaccines and stopping the spread with early detection.
Exactly. But we can't forget about education and destigmatization either.
Right, the more we talk openly about HIV, the more people feel empowered to get tested, get treated, and break down the stigma.
Absolutely.
It's definitely a time to be hopeful. As we wrap up this deep dive, think about how these advancements, these scientific breakthroughs, could change everything.
It's pretty remarkable, isn't it?
The possibilities are just wow. So stay informed, keep the conversation going, and remember, your knowledge, your actions, they can make a difference.
I really can.
Until next time.
See you then.